and this chair started to turn, and it didn't just turn like maybe it's under its own weight and it spun around to face the other way. It started to spin like it was attached to a motor. Even more. Good evening. This is going to be my ghost stories number 3. So, if you're interested in ghost stories that are more personal, not stuff that I've read on Reddit or that I've regurgitated or that is deliberately scary, with, shrieks and people saying, "What was that? Oh my god, I saw a shadow person in the hall," or whatever. A lot of that stuff, look, don't get me wrong, I'm quite addicted to watching that sort of stuff, people going to old lunatic asylums, etc., etc. But as I previously discussed in my ghost stories number 1, I spent a good 10 years working the night shift at Callan Park Mental Asylum, and we were there by ourselves. And quite often I'd be in old buildings that were disused buildings. So there were sections that were being used as the Sydney College of the Arts, the art school for Sydney University, but there was 2 or 3 buildings that were still not in use, and pretty much as they'd been left probably back in the 1980s, if not earlier than that, for some of the buildings. And they were abandoned, and we were using them for storage and various other things. So we were in and out of those buildings a lot, plus all other sections of the hospital at night. And if you want to see my experiences of working in that place late at night, my ghost stories one, I do talk about it. But like I said in that video, things happen, but not things that I could definitively point to and say that was a paranormal experience. So I started to become very disappointed about the prospects of having a bona fide experience that I wouldn't want to put down to my imagination or coming out of a dream and having a hypnagogic hallucination. So, God, chair's creaking away. So go to my ghost stories one, and I have an experience there that involves myself and my wife, and we were both awake and we both saw the same thing, heard the same thing. And so a lot of people say that they want to believe, and I was one of those people. I want to believe, but I had not had an experience that I could point to definitively and say, look, I'm pretty certain that that was something that's very unexplainable. But I've had that experience now, so I'm a lot less skeptical. Having said that, I'm not going to believe everything that I see and hear and whatnot, but there's certain stories that people tell you, or friends and relatives will tell you, and then you'll go, gee, I wish that would happen to me. So I've had that experience, so hang in there. What it might tell you is they're not that common. But most people you speak to who've been around for long enough, aside from childhood memories, which I'm not discounting as being not real, it's just very hard to discern what's imagination and what's real when you're at that age, because you have such a vivid imagination. And that might be why you're more open to having those sorts of experiences too. It could be read that way as well. But either way, childhood experiences are meaningful. And I've had some, like I said, and I talk about it. I talked about it in Ghost Stories number 2. Or in Ghost Stories number 2, I did talk about my childhood experiences, and I had a couple of experiences as a child that felt very real, so, and that are very memorable. These stories, the short stories that I have for this video, are ones that came via a friend of the family who's an airline hostess, and she's had a couple of experiences in Sydney. She used to stay at hotels at King's Cross. I actually can't remember the name of the hotel now, but there was a couple of hotels that she stayed at where she had experiences which really freaked her out. So I think hotels are places probably more likely to encounter stuff like this. If you talk about spirits and ghosts hanging around places where people have had trauma or met violent deaths, obviously hospitals, especially mental hospitals, good candidates, I guess. But hotels, quite often people go there to, they're alone, they're away from family, and sometimes bad things happen. So, especially in King's Cross. So she was staying at this hotel in King's Cross, and she rang my wife one night and basically said, I can't get to sleep because every time I turn the lights off and pull the covers up, I can feel something sitting on the end of the bed. When I turn the lights on, it's not there anymore. But she said she could actually feel the bed physically going down like someone was sitting on it. Couldn't see anything, so that might be even more freaky. But not as freaky as this painting that's probably never going to get finished. But that was one of her experiences, so that's quite a scary experience. The next experience that she had was even more freaky because she was in one of those hotels with one of those bucket type swivel seats that you might have seen in hotels in like the 1970s. And she's sitting there in her room. Doors and windows are closed, so can't be put down to wind or anything like that. And this chair started to turn, and it didn't just turn like maybe it's under its own weight and it spun around to face the other way. It started to spin like it was attached to almost. It just kept going and going and going. And she sat there for a while just looking at this chair, disbelievingly going, this is not happening. And then she was out of there. And got a friend to come back to the room, and by then the chair had stopped. But that was her other story. So there's two stories from hotels that, to my reckoning, sounded quite believable, especially the chair one. When we're talking about poltergeist activity like that, that's pretty hard to explain away, that sort of stuff. So that's two stories. There is a story that Jordan Peterson talks about. So he was actually staying in a hotel and he had some great experiences. So I will try and find that video and I will link it below because I thought that was quite an interesting story from a very learned individual. No matter what you think about Mr. Peterson, whether you think he's a complete dropkick or otherwise, the story sounds quite believable and honest. So that's another experience that's worth catching up on. The next story involves a little bit of a synchronicity, really. So in the video that will come after this one, I'm definitely going to discuss synchronicities. But on this particular occasion, we were asleep at night in my current house, and we just heard this gigantic crashing noise, like really loud. And we turned the lights on and we're like, what was that? And we're looking around, can't find what it was, can't work out what it was. Eventually we just go, oh God, we're just going back to bed. So we went back to bed. Anyway, the next morning, I realised that a painting we had on our wall had dropped. And we didn't know it had dropped because we have a clothes rack up in front of it. So it slid in behind the clothes rack. So that's why we didn't see that it had actually fallen. We didn't realise it had fallen. That's, people might go, oh, it's just a painting that fell off the wall. Well, at this particular time, the person who had done the painting was a good friend of mine from art school who had been very, very ill and had just passed away quite recently. And was on my mind because I'd been told he was very ill, and I kept thinking, got to go and see him, got to go and see him. God, got to go and see him. And of course, I didn't go and see him. Perhaps because I knew he was very, very ill. It was kind of like, you'd like to think you'd rush to see a friend in that situation, but it was just, I felt very uncomfortable with the whole aspect of it. So it's a bit cowardly on my part, and it was quite hanging in my subconscious quite heavily, weighing quite heavily on my mind. And the painting dropped off the wall. It was his painting that he'd given to me as a gift. And I don't think it was a malevolent situation. It was more like, stop. Maybe knowing this gentleman very well, I think he would just be going, don't be an idiot. It's all good. But just to be extra funny about it, I retied the string on the back of this canvas and hung it back on the wall. And the very next night, it did exactly the same thing. And I was just like, oh. Anyway, so that's the three very short stories, ghost stories. And like I said, please have a look at my ghost stories number 1, my ghost stories number 2. I'll link them down below. Please like and subscribe because I need to get some more subscribers if I want to get up to that magic number of 1,000. Well, that's it for this story. Ghost Stories number 3. Stay tuned for the next episode of Woo Woo, and have a pleasant night.